Hello mortals, I am the goddess who created the text world of Listernia, and today I want to do something a little special. I did a previous video recommending novels from authors who started in the golden age of science fiction, and they were all white men. Does this mean there weren't any women science fiction authors? No, it does not. What it does mean is that there weren't any that I read that I could recommend. I can name a few women of that time. Kate Wilhelm is probably the most famous, but there is also a woman named Leigh Brackett who is known as the queen of the space operas. But I haven't really read their work, so I can't recommend them. But I also want you to think of it this way. It's a numbers game. If 1 out of 10 writers are great writers, and there were 100 white male writers and 5 female writers, the odds are that there would be 10 white male writers who are considered great and a 50-50 chance that there was 1 great female writer. Now, thankfully, things have changed since the 30s and 40s and 50s, and I'd like to flash forward a few decades from then, because you are damn right that I can recommend some female science fiction writers in that period. When looking for female science fiction writers, the first person that comes to mind for many of us is Ursula K Le Guin. She is best known for the Ursi trilogy, and those are actually my favorite Le Guin novels. But those were fantasy novels, and we are talking about science fiction. So the science fiction novel that Ursula Le Guin is really known for, and it's a novel I'm going to recommend, and it is often taught in college English classes, and that is The Left Hand of Darkness, published in 1969. This is considered a classic feminist novel as well. It's about a planet where humans have evolved to be completely androgynous. They biologically cycle through male and female forms, and there is also, I believe, a gender-neutral form. Anyway, the story is about, shall we say, heteronormative Earthman who was sent to this planet called Gethin, or Winter, as an envoy or a type of ambassador, and he must try to understand this society where they are not only biologically different, but they have an alien culture or religion or way of looking at things. It's a fascinating novel, and if you haven't read Left Hand of Darkness, I suspect a lot of you watching probably have already read it, but if you have not read it, you should probably consider adding it to your TBR. This type of science fiction does what great science fiction always does. It makes us think about some aspect of our life, whether it be social commentary on technology or military or caste systems, or in this case, the relationship between the genders. This leads me to my second recommendation, another feminist science fiction novel, only this one takes off her gloves and punches you in the face with social commentary. It is a must-read for feminists, and I've mentioned it before. It is A Female Man by Joanna Russ, published in 1975. The story is about alternate dimensions and a woman who travels between those dimensions. The woman is named Janet, and she is from a utopian society. There are no men in her world. Men died out 800 years previously, and women reproduce through parthenogenesis. Now, Janet travels to the world of Joanna, who is, of course, the name of our author, Joanna Russ. And, of course, the character is modeled after Joanna Russ. And she lives on Earth in the mid-70s, just as female liberation is getting underway. Then there is Janine, who lives on an Earth that is more regressive than Joanna's world, because World War II never happened and women never shifted into the labor force. And then there is another dimension where Jael lives. She lives on an Earth where men and women are literally at war with each other. In some sense, the novel is a little dated because there's a lot of focus on whether or not society sees women as inferior to men. Don't get me wrong, I know we have that issue now, but this reflects how feminists felt women were treated in the 1970s, which I believe is different than how we look at things now. At least I hope so. The novel deals with the sexual revolution, with same-sex relationships, and how far should revolutions go to overturn old orders. In other words, should violence be used? Oh, and by the way, the novel is also funny. I remember this one passage where Janet, the woman from the utopian world, talks about how she works so much on her planet, how people think she is this huge overworker, how people think she's this workaholic, and the punchline is that she works 20 hours a week, and that's considered more than enough labor for anyone. Check out The Female Man by Joanna Russ. Now, I'd like to go to a more old-school science fiction writer and pick up Anne McCaffrey's The Dragon Riders of Pern. Now wait, are you asking why am I recommending a fantasy novel when I said I was only recommending science fiction novels? Well, if you were asking that question, then obviously you haven't read the Pern novels. Even though there are dragons, these are definitely science fiction novels. Pern is a planet that humans have colonized, but when the novels take place, they've lost a lot of their technology. Dragons are indigenous creatures on the planet, and humans and dragons can telepathically bond with each other. Both humans and dragons have to work together to fight a deadly rain called Thread. And Thread eats away the planet each time there is a threadfall. Now, the first novel is called Dragon Flight, published in 1969, which is made up of several novellas, which were previously published in, you guessed it, science fiction magazines, which is sometimes called a fix-up novel, much like Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles, which I talked about in my last video. One of the novellas in Dragonflight won both the Hugo and Nebula Award. Now, Anne McCaffrey was the first woman to win either of those awards, so if you are interested in the history of science fiction, this book contains that important hallmark. That said, I think the third novel of the series, The White Dragon, is the best of the Pern novels. But that's just my opinion. You should definitely start with the first novel. Our next science fiction writer is C.J. Cherryh. She wrote one of my favorite science fiction novels, but I hesitate to recommend it because I've recommended it before to friends and they said they had trouble getting into it. But what the hell, I love this novel. It is called Cytine, and it was published in 1988. It takes place in Cherryh's Alliance Union universe, which she based a lot of her books in. The first novel was Down Below Station in that universe, and that's also a great novel. But you really don't need to read that or any other novel to enjoy Cytine, unless you want to. Cytine was originally published as 3 novels, which is how I read them, and they have gorgeous covers. But now my understanding is they are only published as 1 volume. The story is about a brilliant woman named Ariane Emery who leads the world of Cytine, but she is murdered. Her people want her to live again, so they take a clone of her and try to replicate the exact same history as the original Ariane, including reproducing any psychologically damaging events. So there's a lot of exploration of what clones are and what they are not. Most clones are called AZI, which stands for Artificial Zygote Insemination, and they aren't considered real people because their brains are programmed and their personalities shaped through something called tapes. This is a novel about cloning and what it means to be human and not human. This is also a murder mystery novel, and this is a novel about politics. It is not an action-packed space opera, but I always felt it was a fascinating novel, and if you pick it up, I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. But of course, the warning is that I know some people have trouble getting into the novel. The final author I want to recommend is a Black female science fiction author. And there aren't that many of them around now, unfortunately, but there certainly weren't many Black women writing science fiction in the 70s and 80s. In fact, this is the only one that I know of. That author is Octavia Butler. And the novel I want to recommend is Wild Seed, published in 1980. Wild Seed was the first Octavia Butler novel I read, and from then on I read everything she put out. Wild Seed is part of a series known as the Patronus series. It is chronologically the first novel in the series, even though it was the fourth novel published. The premise of the novel is that there are certain humans born with extraordinary powers. They come from a wild seed, and two of them are born in Africa. A woman named Annie Anwu, who has total control over her body. She can heal herself, she can heal others, she can transform into animals, and because of her healing powers and her ability to manipulate her body, she never grows old. The other is a man named Doro, whose power is that he can transfer his consciousness from one body to another, and thus he too is immortal. The story opens in the 17th century, so it deals with slavery. It deals with domination over other people. It deals with patriarchy. And it tells a story of a strong, authentic Black female character. Now, these are some of the science fiction writers from the 70s and 80s that I think are must-reads. I'll have affiliate links below in the description if you are interested. If you want to see a part 2, please let me know in the comments below. And if you have a recommendation of an early female science fiction author, put that down in the comments as well. Until then, may all the books you read be blessed.